This is the DP Show,
where insanity sounds sane.
And now, the man, the myth, the legend in his own mind, D. Palmer.
This is the DP Show. I am D. Palmer, DS Palmer, if you will. Talk a little bit more about the Olympics. Last week, I told you all exactly why I don't care for these things. I find them very statist and otherwise boring. I just don't know why watching people run in straight lines and swim in straight lines and doing all that sorts of stuff always in a straight line is ever that interesting. And it has been brought to my attention that it is fun every now and then. It is fun every 4 years. It's fun because we don't get to do it very often. That was from my sweet wife. I think that she's perfectly wrong. I think that most people watch these things because of the horrible backstories. So many crippled parents we hear about during the Olympics, and the evidence I have for this notion is that here the dream team, as they continue to call it, even though it's nowhere near as dreamy as the '92 men's basketball team, full of future Hall of Famers and so forth, but the dream team has had one very interesting game against Lithuania. It has had not any real other close calls, but some historic blowouts, including a couple against some pretty impressive teams, most recently Argentina, which has more than a few NBA players on its roster. And for as far as I know, of course, I'm probably the wrong person to be trying to talk about this because, don't watch the Olympics, but it doesn't seem like they get a lot of airtime, does the basketball team. And never, back when I did watch the Olympics, that certainly wasn't the case. And from the best I can tell, it is evidence that the Olympics are being produced and aired for a genre of fan that doesn't necessarily care much about sport. They care a lot about all the soap opera that goes behind it. Well, I hate to be that guy. And those of you who might be a little bit more familiar with the program, I think you're probably rolling your eyes right now because, indeed, I do. I do love being that guy. But there is an interesting story that's just been released by an alternative news source, OpposingViews.com. At least I think this is alternative news. I spent a lot of time searching news on the interweb, and I've never heard of this source, but an interesting story that is titled 2012 Olympics, Chinese doctor accuses Michael Phelps of steroid abuse. Dun, dun, dun. Michael Phelps and steroid abuse. To read from Chris Brooklier, after John Leonard, executive director of the World Swimming Coaches Association, brought into question 16-year-old Chinese Olympic gold medal Yi Xuan's performance at the Olympics by calling it suspicious, former Chinese Olympic doctor Chen Zhanghao responded by accusing 19-time medalist Michael Phelps of steroid use. Asked whether he thought Yi's performance at the Olympics was abnormal, Dr. Chen responded, "Abnormal? America's Phelps broke 7 world records. Is he normal?" Well, no. And over here on this side of the pond, that would be the Pacific Pond, we have been suggesting that Michael Phelps is not abnormal. He is, in fact, special, and that's why he gets to push sub-sandwiches and so forth. But he went on to say, did Dr. Chen, that he has long suspected Phelps of using steroids, but said that without evidence, he has stayed silent. The Americans have made many extraordinary performances, but without evidence, we have kept silent. If that is the case, then why would Dr. Chen come out recently with this claim, despite any source of evidence? Well, as it sounds, Dr. Chen is making statements without any reason or logic. Pause. Is that the case, though? Is that the case that he is making these statements without any reason or logic? First off, it is of interest that Dr. Chen has experienced doctoring Olympic athletes. And I've referenced this book last week. It's Game of Shadows. The expose that helped bring all of the steroid use in Major League Baseball to light, but I was surprised when I started reading it that there is an equal amount of fascinating information about steroid abuse in the Olympic sports, especially track and field. I'm going to read it to you, a paragraph from that one. This is discussing a deal that the United States Anti-Doping Agency was trying to swing with a sprinter named Kelly White, who was the reigning 100 and 200 meter world champion. They said that they went to her agent and they felt the ADA, United States Anti-Doping Agency, had a chance to really try to use her to try to get in with all the other drug cheats because, quote, she couldn't admit to her parents that she was a drug cheat. Madden offered to meet with her family and tell them that she'd made mistakes, but that she was doing the right thing by helping the USADA expose all the other drug cheats. Collins refused. Like Kelly White, she was certain that other athletes were going to get away with it. Both women had told the USADA that the use of drugs was rampant in track and field. White suggested that 6 out of 8 sprinters in any given elite, like the Olympics, 100-meter final were on the juice or steroids. Collins, who's another sprinter that they're trying to get to swing, said that it was more likely all 8. Now, I read this in 2008, before the 2008 Olympics. And I thought to myself, again, I'd already lost all interest with this. I cover non-revenue sports at the collegiate level, and the joke among most of us in that field is that why would we go watch this stuff for free when we already get to or have to watch it for a paycheck? But I could not understand how after this book, this book that was so fascinating and so filled with great sourcing that the two authors were eventually held in contempt of court and thrown in the poke because they refused to give up their sources. All right. After this book, how could anybody watch the Olympics without looking at them as nothing more than this giant charade full of hopped up steroid abusers? Or in other words, those of us who actually feel that sports should be determined on one's natural ability tend to look at the use of steroids as something more than a little fraudulent. And as I was reading this, we've already known that there's been a lot of different track and field stars. Ben Johnson was the most famous in 1988, broke a world record, and then like the next day found out he was on anabolic steroids. It's happened so much in track and field that you kind of just took it for granted that this sort of thing was always a possibility. And that's why I have almost no excitement when, I think I'm going to say his name right, but Usain Bolt sets a new Olympic record, runs a sub-9 700-meter dash. According to Game of Shadows, now remember, 2 Olympic-level sprinters, one of them is a record holder, 100 and 200 meters, saying that at least 6 out of 8 of that final heat were on the juice. And people find this interesting. Now, we did the same thing with baseball, where there's this whole hubbub about how many home runs were being hit because how many players were on steroids. And if you want to read the book, that's where it's most interesting because Barry Bonds, who was, of course, already a Hall of Fame player because of his ability to combine power with speed, gold gloves, and the whole 9 yards, he saw all the adulation that Mark McGwire was getting, according to this book, Game of Shadows, and decided that he was going to hop on the steroids so he could start setting all sorts of records and so forth. And sure enough, he did it. But he, almost doubled in size and all sorts of other strange things. And the suggestion is that baseball allowed Bonds and other players to hop onto the steroids to try to gain more popularity because you might remember that commercial from about 15 years ago, Chicks Dig the Long Ball. And sure enough, baseball was getting all sorts of great eyeballs watching it, all sorts of new media deals, and has been swimming in money ever since. But those of us who really feel as if the sport should be determined on one's natural ability, we're a little bit appalled by this, if only because Bonds is now breaking hallowed records. And these things have stood for almost a century. And we're looking back at it like Babe Ruth didn't need any steroids to hit these home runs. And, of course, Babe Ruth wasn't going up against the same kind of pitching that Bonds was, but it seemed like it was just tainting the whole thing into what could easily be defined as a cheater. Now, the free market has a little bit of a problem with that term because, according to the free market, somebody should be able to do anything with their body so they could try to make themselves X, Y, or Z more strong, more beautiful, more whatever, and all to try to advance their own personal gain. But the problem I have with that, whether it be Olympic sprinters, potentially Olympic swimmers, Major League Baseball players, when one voluntarily starts working into a contract with another institution, understanding fully that certain things are not are against the rules. Right? You are not supposed to use steroids, says Major League Baseball. You are not supposed to use any sort of performance-enhancing drug, says the Olympic committees and anti-doping agencies, so on and so forth, and etc., then you are agreeing to abide by those rules. You are agreeing to make it so that only your natural ability is going to be helping you win or lose any of these events. And when you voluntarily go into that contract, it's no different than when I went once and applied for a job at I'll just say it was the Home Depot. Then I was rather shocked when it told me that, or asked me in the online questionnaire for the application if I've ever gone to work drunk. What? No, I don't drink, thankfully. But just that they would ask this was rather shocking. What kind of person is applying for a job there? But the point was that if you want to go work at that place, you don't get to do it while you're a little bit outside of your natural realm. And if you have a problem with that, go find a job somewhere else. Same thing with baseball and the Olympics, right? If you want to show somebody how fast you are because you have the best chemist, or how far you can hit a baseball because you are able to work out with the best chemist, you should not do it then for these institutions. And since then, baseball has really been hitting people with some big suspensions after they start testing positive for these different drugs. I applaud it because I'm a purist. I think that people should be playing baseball only as they are allowed to, based on the body that God gave them, not that somebody can create in a test tube. Incidentally, if you're thinking, well, these guys keep passing drug tests, according to Game of Shadows, the way you do that is you use stuff that you don't know how to find. So it really is a contest between whose is the best chemist. And you agreed into this contract. You walked right into it, athletes. You should not be cheating. That is why it is cheating. This is the DP Show on iTalk 106.7.